Welcome to Step by Step, a video series where we go over a bunch of specific steps in decisions and how they work. Today's goal is to talk about the file directory steps. So, what are the file directory steps? Well, these are a set of steps that you can find under the file management category in the toolbox. And these steps just allow us to manipulate and change the local file directory within decisions flows. This includes steps to create, delete, move, check if they exist, a lot of different things that we can do with the directories. And we'll look at each of the options that we have available to us here shortly. A couple things that are important to note for the requirements of these steps. First thing that's important is to make sure that the service account that is set up through decisions has the proper permissions in order to utilize or complete the different actions that will be done with the directory steps. So when you set up your decisions server, you have to set the service account. Then just make sure that that account it has access to the folders that you want to access. Depending on what you need, you'll need read and execute, you'll need modify, you'll probably need write access in order to do things like create a directory or access data inside a directory, things like that. Another thing that's also important to note is you'll need to know the desired directory, right? You'll need to know what exactly do you need or do you have access to? What exactly do you need? And you'll need to be able to include that. By default, all of the steps will have access to the decisions server folder within your decisions folder. So if you do not have a specific directory, that's the one that it will be kind of focused on. But otherwise, that absolute path is going to be necessary. So like I said, by default, if you don't include any additional information about the absolute path in the directory steps, then it will default to program files, decisions server. And then, whatever is inside that particular folder. However, if you want to go further, if you want to go deeper into those folders, further into perhaps the logs folder or something, you'll have to include that there. If you want to go to something completely different that's not directly in the decisions server, but still on the local file system, you'll need to know that exact path. So you'll need to keep that in mind when you're working through this problem. Also, something that maybe note, depending on the process or what you're trying to use specifically with it, you may also need to include the file name. If you're directly looking for a specific file, you may want to also include that. So for example, if I was in the decisions server folder and there was a file in it called item.png, then I would need to do that with that /item.png. And then lastly, before we take a quick look into decisions, these are the steps or potential steps that we have available that directly relate to the file directory. There's create that allows us to create new folders on whatever the provided path is. Move so we can change the location, place it from one location, put it in a different one. You can rename a directory. So if it's named log and you want to change it to logs, if it's named cow and you want to change it to sheep, whatever that is, you can easily just rename it. Delete, exactly as it sounds, deletes it. The directory exists is a rule, so it doesn't output anything. It just has the two pathways, true or false, to check if a directory exists. Maybe you want to use this to check if something already exists, and if it does, to then output a new one. If it does not already exist, or sorry, if it does exist, don't do anything. If it does not exist, create a new one, something like that. And then the other directory specific step that we can find is list files in directory. This will just list all the files in the provided directory. So whatever that path is, it'll look inside that particular directory and list all of the files items inside that particular directory. But let's take a look in decisions and see some of these steps so you can see what the inputs look like. So here in decisions, I have just some examples to demonstrate where I can find these things and what some of them will look like. As a reminder, if I want to look for them, I could easily search for things if I know I'm looking for directory steps, but I can also find all of these under file management. You'll find a whole list of different steps that relate to the files in the file system. Now there's more than just these are focused on the file directory steps, but there's other ones too related to files. So you can delete, create files, find files, move files, rename files, things like that as well. But our focus is just on the directories for this, but you'll find other steps like that in here as well. As mentioned, each of them have slightly different requirements depending on what the focus of the step is. Things like if I want to rename, it says, well, what's the directory that I want to rename and what do I want the new name to be? So you can simply add the absolute path here and then provide with the new name. Move directory, add the absolute path for your directory here, add the absolute path for where you want that directory to move. And then also you have the ability to overwrite a file if something already exists. Once you try to move it, if something already exists, you could overwrite it if you want. You have the ability to delete. If you have a file directory, here's the absolute path. You can have it throw an error if it is not empty, if you like to. And then create. Simply create a directory name so you could provide the absolute path with the final part of that path being what you want the name to be of that particular directory, and it'll create it for you along that path. And then the other one that I have is just I have list files in directory here just to show an example of how that works. And then I didn't drag this yet, but directory exists, like I mentioned, is a rule. So I provided a directory, and if that directory does exist, it'll go down the true path. If it does not, it'll go down the false path. Here, just as a quick demonstration, list files in directory. You can provide an absolute path. It does not have to be specific to decisions. For example, if I did this with my C drive, I could go to a specific user on my desktop and into a folder called Sprint Grading Documents that's on my desktop here. And then what this will do is it'll list all the files that are inside this particular folder in my desktop, since I'm following it there. And then this is just getting an item, changing it to a file reference so it can display on a form here. But again, if I run it, there we go. It's displaying the item that it grabbed. I can go and I can take just a quick look here and I can see, hey, this is what it grabbed, and you can kind of see a good example of how they look. So here's the directory, here's the files in it. It shows all of them by absolute path. So there's the directory Sprint Grading Documents, and then here's the specific item within that item here, right? And all of the different specific files that are in that particular folder here. So I can get all of that data if I want to with a list files and directory step. I could do the same thing if I wanted to move that directory, rename it, anything like that. One more thing I just wanted to briefly show. Let's say I did what I talked about and I want to just input a file here. If I don't put the absolute path, it is going to look for this directory inside the decisions server folder. So if I put something here that doesn't exist, it's going to look for it inside that folder. So I don't have a folder called cow inside my decision server folder. It's going to throw an error, but it specifically will point out that it could not find a part of the path, program files, decision server with that particular directory there, right? But it did try to look inside decision server because I did not provide the rest of the path. It will always just look here. So just keep that in mind if you're searching. If I do pick something that is in that path, like what I had typed there previously, logs, for example, logs is a folder in the decisions server folder. So now it's going to list all the files in the logs folder inside decisions server. And so you can see it'll run that. I don't have something that can display, but if I show you here, this checked inside my logs folder, so I didn't have to provide the absolute path, but it did find data because the logs folder does exist in program files, decisions server. So it'll look inside that folder, it finds all my decisions logs and shows the names of all of those pieces of information, right? It does provide the name based on the directory name that you give. So it does not show, so it may not be obvious. It does not show the decision server path, everything up to that, but that is where it's searching. And that is the only way that you'll be able to access information without putting the rest of the actual, full path in front of the inputs here. But again, if you do want to display all of that information and you want to make sure that you get exactly what you're looking for and it's not in the decisions server folder, then you may have to include the rest of the path. So just keep that in mind if you're using these steps. And this will conclude our step-by-step over the file directory steps. Thanks for watching.